Alrighty, we're going to get this show started. Hey guys, thanks for joining me in Track S. I am Cash. I'm going to be your host for the day, and I want to make sure that I'm giving ample amount of time for us to enjoy this next topic. So before I pass it over to Mr. Ben Ball, I'm just going to give a quick reminder. Please ask questions. The chat is always open. We are also going to be having polls, so I believe you'll be able to access the polls at the bottom left of the screen. And we learn from you. So please, please, please put us to the test. We love a good challenge. But that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Ben Ball to cover this really, really interesting topic of the downside of self-hosted DNS and what you need to know. So take
Thanks,
it away.
Cash. Really appreciate it. Welcome everybody to this, what I hope will be a very interesting session. You know, a lot of people don't pay that much attention to DNS. They think it's just something that is there. It's like oxygen, right? You have it, but you don't necessarily know that you have it. But it's really very important. So let's just talk a little bit about that. Just here's what we're going to talk about today. Why is DNS so critical? What are your options for DNS? Why not self-host, or why self-host? And then, you know, sort of what's the journey to a managed DNS provider? So here are the basics. If DNS is down, your business is down. It's that simple, really. DNS is the thing that makes the internet tick, right? So here are just some examples of some disasters that have happened on the internet in the last couple of years. So the first really big one, I think, in more recent memory was this healthcare.gov rollout. Now, not all of these are, you know, DNS outages per se, but they're outages nonetheless. You know, so we all remember the debacle when the healthcare.gov site got rolled out. Too much traffic. Everybody wanted to sign up for these healthcare plans. The site got overwhelmed. That is actually a DNS issue, a capacity issue that was sort of manifested through DNS. The Dyn cyber attack, a lot of Dyn's customers remember this very well. It brought down a good portion of the internet for a couple of days there, and all of those companies were not able to do business in that time. So that was a pretty significant outage. There was another similar outage that Cloudflare had in 2020 that also brought down a huge proportion of the internet, stopped a lot of e-commerce out there. A lot of companies lost a lot of money on that. And then the most recent high-profile example is the Taylor Swift Ticketmaster debacle, which resulted in the people at Ticketmaster being hauled in front of Congress to give an accounting of why they didn't have enough capacity in their system to handle all of those queries that were coming in from the internet. So all of this to say that DNS can play a significant role in your business. A lot of people don't see that day to day because they don't have an outage, they don't have a DDoS attack. But when it comes, you absolutely know that DNS is usually going to be the main, the main reason that it's happening. There's a saying out there: it's always DNS. It's almost become a cliche, but that doesn't mean that it's not true. It is definitely true. So you'll see a poll down in the lower left side of your screen there, just asking what you use for your DNS today. And I'm just going to go through some of the different options that are there. So the first is self-hosted, the main sort of topic today. There are two flavors of self-hosted DNS. The first thing you can do is you can deploy all of these servers around the world to capture internet queries, and you can use an open source solution called Bind to manage those things. So, that means that you're deploying, maintaining, architecting all of that capacity around the world, and you are buying the capacity. You've got boxes that you're putting in various places, and you have to make sure there are enough boxes to handle all of the queries that are coming in from around the world. Another way to do that, if you don't want to do it with Bind, you can do it with a DDI solution: DNS, DHCP, and IP address management. So a company like Bluecat, Infoblox, there are some other sort of minor players there. You can run that DDI solution on those boxes that you deploy around the world, and you can sort of self-host your DNS today. So again, two models within that self-hosted bucket. Another version is you can use registrar DNS. So GoDaddy, Name.com, Safe Names, there are thousands of registrars out there. And so when you spin up a domain name, they will often include DNS for free. And I put free in quotation marks there because it is actually included in the price. And sometimes there's an upsell there if you want to get more capacity out of your DNS. But that's for a very sort of basic option that all you're doing is just responding to queries and up to a certain level in terms of a certain capacity level. That's what registrar DNS provides. So again, a very basic offering. Another option is cloud DNS. So a lot of developers will go this route. They'll go with AWS. Route 53 is the DNS offering there. Azure DNS, Google DNS. These are often tightly coupled to cloud services. And what I mean by that is anything that you spin up in those environments that you attach to Route 53, they're going to be stuck in Route 53 for a long time because these cloud DNS providers, they don't support what's called XFR, the ability to transfer those DNS records into other systems. So you're kind of stuck with that cloud DNS provider once you choose it. And it can be difficult to manage those across cloud providers. So if you're using Azure DNS and Route 53 together, that can be very difficult because they don't talk to each other by design. Another option is a bundled managed DNS. So these are sort of the Cloudflares, the Akamais of the world who have a DNS offering, and then they have other things that they surround that DNS offering with. So a web application firewall, some sort of DDoS protection, a content delivery network, all of those things tend to sort of come together. And again, they often include DNS for free, but it's actually laundered into the price of that larger package. And then finally, you've got sort of independent managed DNS providers like IBM's NS1 Connect option. There are a couple of others out there as well that allow you to do sort of neutral traffic steering between different providers, and they're not coupled to any other services. There's not sort of a larger package that's surrounding them. So those are all the DNS options. I'm sure in the poll we're going to see a wide range of different options that people are using today. So for that first option, that self-hosted option, why would you choose to do that? There are a couple of different reasons. Maybe you have some specific requirements. A lot of companies that operate in a specific geography, usually one country or even just a region of a country, will choose to self-host their DNS because they're only looking at one particular place in the world, and all they need to do is spin up maybe one box in order to do that, so no problem. Or they want to concentrate all of their boxes in one specific place. That could be a great option for them, and they don't need a global system, in other words. And sometimes it's about the back-end system connections. Maybe it's where the sort of the architecture of their application makes it better. They have some specific needs there that can't be met by a larger managed provider. Security can be another one, and this varies a lot from company to company. But sometimes they have to send their queries to a certain place or have to channel them in a certain way, and that's a requirement that they can only do at scale through self-hosting. So that's a reason to do it. Another reason people do it is they just want to leverage their existing resources. They don't want to bring on a new vendor. They say, look, we can just build it, right? Especially at the early stages of a company or the early stages of an application, this is generally how people do it. The developers sort of puff out their chests and say, ha, we're just going to put this in place. Now, you may have a long-term price to pay for that. It might not scale very well, but in the very beginning, it's actually pretty easy to deploy DNS as a self-hosted option out there in the world. So again, when scale is an issue, that's usually not how people approach it. But when developers are just sort of throwing together an application, they tend to write checks that other people are going to have to cash later on, but that's not usually their concern in the beginning. Control is another big reason why companies self-host their DNS. They say, we can do it better. We want to keep it in-house. There's usually some allergy to SaaS companies there. They want everything on-prem so that they can see everything and that they can own everything that their traffic is going through. That's a pretty typical one that we see. And then finally, the big one is inertia. We've just always done it this way. That's something that we hear a lot. And in the absence of an outage, a lot of companies will just coast with whatever their DNS offering is, even if it's gradually declining in functionality or the scale that they've got is not necessarily specific to that task anymore. They'll just sort of keep going along until something bad happens, until something breaks, until there's a problem, and then that inertia suddenly goes away. We also get a lot that, hey, migration from self-hosted is hard. Like, we've built this highly complicated, interlocking series of connectivity pieces here. And to undo that and to put it into a more standardized format would just be really, really difficult. We hear that a lot as well. So again, there are a lot of pretty good reasons actually to self-host your DNS, or at least they're good in the beginning. But as you go on, I think you can see that there are a lot of reasons why self-hosting doesn't work in the end. Oh, sorry, one more option there is, yeah, it's just a lower priority. Okay, so what has changed? What would actually take you off of self-hosted DNS? And you can see here, basically it's two things. It's the complexity of your application starts to grow. So you have more connectivity needs. Those needs get a little more complicated as well. So you need something that will be able to handle all of that traffic. And if you're self-hosting your DNS, that means that you have to plan for all of that capacity. You have to buy the boxes, you have to deploy the boxes, you have to scale the system so that it can handle all of that additional capacity. And especially if the internet traffic for your application is variable, that can be a pretty difficult thing to predict. If you've got a retail and e-commerce sort of platform out there, you never know what coupon code is going to go viral, right? That could be a significant issue. And if you hit the upper levels of your availability, then that could really impact, the revenue of your company. And on the other side, the infrastructure complexity, that can also become an issue as well. Particularly when you're self-hosted, a lot of those architectures can be quite brittle. There's only one way to do it, and there's no secondary, there's no backup or no failover to handle additional traffic if you exceed your capacity. And as applications get more complicated, setting up all of those secondary options when you're self-hosted can be quite difficult to manage. So again, a lot of companies have the best of intentions when they start with self-hosted DNS, but as complexity of applications and infrastructures grows, we find that they often outgrow that initial self-hosted DNS solution that they've got. So here are some, again, just a couple of reasons to move away. External threats. We talked about the Taylor Swift incident. That was basically a DDoS attack. Some malicious, some not malicious. It could just be, a spike in traffic. But anyway, you're going to get to that sort of capacity or scale concern eventually. And a lot of customers that NS1 has sort of reach that capacity through some sort of traffic spike and saw that what they were doing was not sustainable. Then there's sort of the human factor. A lot of companies are starting to realize that the level of DNS expertise in the world is starting to go down. A lot of the DNS people who came of age in the sort of the 80s and early 90s when DNS started to really sort of proliferate throughout the internet, a lot of those experts are starting to retire, and they're very difficult to replace. A lot of newer network engineers aren't as skilled in DNS. They don't have the sort of those specific things. So they need something that is easier to deploy at scale and easier to manage, that doesn't require a lot of specific skills in DNS. And then even if you do have all of those DNS experts, the cost of managing that, both in personnel terms, but also in terms of the actual cost of deploying the boxes, can get pretty large over time, especially as a company grows and as its global footprint grows, that cost can get pretty significant. Reliability, as we've talked about, that's another big thing, especially when it comes to failover options. So the ability to go to something as a secondary DNS if you reach that capacity. I think that's actually very difficult to architect if you've got self-hosted DNS, especially also if you want to look at uptime monitors. So being able to look at the back end of your solution and say, okay, which server is available now or which is slow now. Being able to measure that can be difficult to connect with all of those things using Bind and even some of the DDI solutions out there. So moving on to some more advanced reasons why you would move away from self-hosted DNS is just performance. Reliability is sort of the baseline thing that most people look for when they're putting DNS together. But as applications get more advanced, as performance of those connections starts to become more of a factor, specifically in industries like e-commerce or video streaming, banking is also a big factor there. That connection speed really starts to matter. And we can show some of the data. The self-hosted DNS is actually the worst performing option for DNS out there. We did a study with our partners over at Catchpoint, and we found that self-hosted DNS is 40% slower than a managed DNS provider, any managed DNS provider on average. That's a big difference. If you think about the speed of your application, would you want that to be 40% faster? Of course you would. Once you get to that sort of large scale deployment out there. So that's something that self-hosted DNS doesn't do very well at. And you start to get into more sophisticated use cases like geographic steering, traffic steering based on real user monitoring or RUM data. These are things that self-hosted DNS just can't do. There's no functionality for that. Automation is also increasingly a large reason why a lot of companies don't do self-hosted DNS from the beginning or tend to move away from self-hosted DNS. And the reason for that is that Bind doesn't have an API. It doesn't support automation well. And a lot of companies now are automation first, right? They build these things on purpose. Also, integrations with other networking tools that you do through APIs, that's a big reason why a lot of companies are starting to move away from self-hosted DNS. And then finally, it's just about features. Being able to have support for your DNS. That's a basic thing that a lot of people are looking for, just a human to call when something goes wrong. Support for different features within DNS itself. The number of record types is constantly growing. DNS itself is constantly evolving. And if you're self-hosting your DNS, that means that you have to evolve with all of that. You have to start supporting all of those new things, which means you have to keep up on everything. You have to go to all of the IETF meetings and the ICANN meetings to figure out where DNS is going, and then you have to adjust your system to compensate for that. That's something that a lot of companies just don't want to do anymore. So they look for a managed provider to fill in the gap for them on their behalf. Okay, so say you've made the decision to go away from self-hosted DNS to some sort of managed DNS provider. As we showed on the previous slide, you've got a lot of options out there. So how do you figure out what is the best provider to go with? Here are just some suggestions of things that you might want to look for. And we've sort of divided them up into two areas. The first are table stakes. Any DNS provider worth its salt is going to provide all of these things just right out of the box. So support for IPv6, two-factor authentication, some sort of SSO support. This varies a little bit by company in terms of which SSO platforms they support, but they're sort of the core ones that you probably all know about. They're going to support those. Anycast, being able to switch between points of presence, just for any different reason. That's going to be a standard feature. A wide number of points of presence in the desired location that you've got. We talked a little bit before about self-hosted providers that tend to concentrate all of their boxes in one place. If you're growing out of that and going into a global business, you've still probably got regions that are more priority than others. So you're going to want to look at where those points of presence are and how many of them are available at any given moment. DNSSEC is a big feature for a lot of folks. Not everybody uses DNSSEC, of course, but the ones that do, that can be pretty complicated to deploy out there. So you're going to want to have a provider that not only supports it, but makes it really easy to deploy as well. 100% uptime SLA is also pretty standard across the industry now. Basically, there's a difference, of course, between a 100% uptime SLA and a guarantee. None of these providers will actually provide a guarantee of the uptime, but usually what the SLA means is that if it dips below 100% uptime, they will pay you the difference. Basically subtract that from your contract. And then finally, low latency, better performance. That's generally why a lot of people go to a managed DNS provider, is because they want people to handle that on their behalf and get better performance. Talked about that 40% number, so you're going to want to get that right out of the bat. So once you get beyond those sort of table stakes, this is where the different providers start to diverge a little bit in terms of their functionality. So, geo-aware routing is a somewhat sort of basic thing that a lot of people offer, but there's a lot of nuance in terms of how the routing is actually put together, how easy it is to implement, all the different options there. So you're going to want to look a little deeper into that to figure out, does it actually fit your business needs? RUM traffic steering or global server load balancing. Not every company, not every managed service provider offers that, but the ones that do tend to specialize in it. And so that's something that if you're at that level of sophistication, you're going to want to dig deeply into the details there to figure out if it meets your needs, if the RUM traffic data that you're getting is refreshed fast enough, if it's of a quantity that you want, or if you have your own RUM data, will you be able to import that into your managed DNS provider? That's a key factor for a lot of companies. We find a lot of companies, especially in the video streaming area, but increasingly in things like e-commerce and gaming, they're using different CDNs at one time or another. They're switching between providers based on cost or reliability or availability or performance as well. So we find that when companies want to do that, especially if they go with one of these bundled providers or one of the cloud providers, they often make it difficult to switch from one CDN provider to the other because they're also providing the CDN. So they've kind of got a thumb on the scale there. Other managed service providers are a little more neutral in how they can switch from one CDN provider to another. So that's something that you're just going to want to look at. What fits the needs of your business? Why are you doing multi-CDN switching? And who makes it easy to do that? And on what factors would you switch between different CDNs at any given moment? Mainland China presents an interesting conundrum for a lot of network operators out there. Because of the so-called Great Firewall, that actually slows down a lot of traffic if you're going from inside China to a server outside of China. And a lot of DNS providers don't look at that use case very well. They don't tend to appreciate that. They don't have points of presence within mainland China sometimes, so they're crossing that Great Firewall and incurring that that service hit. So that's something that if you have business in mainland China that you're doing, you're going to want to look very closely at what that performance is going to look like with a managed provider. The level of support you get. Both during migration and after. Obviously, migration people are generally focused on that when they're going away from self-hosted. But even afterwards, DNS is a weedy business. There are always little sort of pieces of technology that you're going to want to look at. Again, DNS itself is changing a lot of the time, so you're going to want to be able to go and talk to someone who is an expert in the field to make sure that you get things right, and that when you get things right, that they stay right for quite a long time afterwards. So that varies across the industry. Some companies are better known for their support than others. API quality and scope. This is actually a big deal for a lot of those automation-focused customers. There's a big difference between some APIs in the industry and others. Some are kind of tacked on APIs where the company will develop it in the UI and then sort of figure out how the API works later. And other companies are API first, right? They'll develop the API and then develop the UI on top of that. So that sort of which comes first piece can be really important in terms of how usable the API is in practice. And again, to the automation point, support for Terraform, Ansible, every company does plug into those things, but how they plug into them, how easy it is, how broad the scope is for the support of that is going to vary provider by provider. Data analysis. This is a quite advanced use case where you're actually looking at your DNS configurations. You're looking at why are you getting NX domains and things like that. Where are DDoS attacks coming from? This is something that sort of the highest level of our customer base tends to look at. But for those companies, it's very important because they want to stay ahead of any of those problems that we identified before, DDoS attacks, misconfigurations, things like that. And they know that there's a rich data source there in DNS that they can sort of prefigure how they're going to respond to some of those things. So a lot of companies will look for that as well. Okay, so the good news that I'm here to tell you is that IBM's own DNS solution, NS1 Connect, does all of these things. And I've highlighted just a couple things where we actually excel. Obviously, we do all of the table stakes things, but that low latency part is really key. And again, in that study that we did with Catchpoint, we actually found that NS1 Connect is the fastest managed DNS provider on the planet. In some cases by quite a lot, actually, in comparison to even other managed service providers, but heads and shoulders above all of the self-hosted options that are out there. So much so that it's really a no-brainer if you're a self-hosted provider that you should absolutely go with definitely a managed provider, but probably NS1 Connect is going to be the best for you if you're looking at performance as your sort of main goal. The other areas where we offer a lot of very specific functionalities in that RUM traffic steering. We have the most number of traffic steering options, so the most flexibility in terms of how you deploy that RUM data, the most factors that you can use to steer traffic based on that RUM data. It's a very sophisticated offering. So if you're, again, in an area like video streaming, gaming, e-commerce, that RUM traffic steering can add a lot of value. It can actually speed up your connections by a considerable amount and make them a lot more reliable, resilient over time as well. I mentioned mainland China. NS1 Connect is one of the only providers out there that provides a specific offering for queries in mainland China. We have dedicated points of presence within mainland China that will handle all of those queries. So basically, we've segregated traffic around the world so that things that come from mainland China stay in mainland China. They don't have to cross the Great Firewall. And that the opposite is also true, that traffic from surrounding countries doesn't mistakenly go to a Chinese server. And again, the reason for that is there's just a huge performance hit with the Great Firewall. So we avoid that. And because of that, we actually have 3 times faster performance in mainland China than any other managed service provider out there for DNS. So that's a big reason to go with NS1 Connect if you have business in mainland China. So we also like to tout our level of support. This is something that we lead with. We hold the hands of our customers as they migrate onto our platform, and then we stay in touch afterwards to make sure that they're up to date with all the newest features that we offer and that we're delivering value, whatever that might mean for a customer over time. And then finally, I'll just mention that we are an API-first company. Everything that you can do in our UI, you can do through an API. Around 40% of our customers never even look at the UI. They just use API functionality. And so that speaks to kind of the usability of that function for a lot of our customers. Okay, so in a nutshell, that's why you should be using our platform and why self-hosted in particular can be a really difficult road to hoe. So I would just encourage you to, if you're still self-hosting your DNS, don't fall prey to that inertia. Take a look at what your DNS is doing and find out if it's still fit for purpose, and then ask some of those questions about these different requirements, and figure out if your self-hosted solution can do all of those. So let me just open it up for questions. Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ben. We actually do have a couple of questions. So first off, and this is a question that I was also curious on because I was unaware of this, what does IBM use for DNS internal and external?
Right. So for external, we just started using NS1 actually. Before IBM was an Akamai customer, it was actually costing IBM quite a lot of money to stay with Akamai. So when IBM bought NS1, they made the switch. It was a seamless migration that we led through our own professional services team. We walked them through all of their use cases. And we did it gradually, over time. We started off as a secondary option behind Akamai, and then very gradually we sort of moved up into that primary option. Internally, IBM uses Infoblox and other DDI solutions, but has not used that for external DNS for authoritative DNS up to this point.
Okay, sick. Thanks for clarifying. And then we have a second question. How much faster is managed DNS versus self-hosted? Is there any data available?
There is, and I'm happy to circulate. There's actually an ebook that we wrote with Catchpoint that lays out all of the data. We did a pretty impressive, if I say so myself, mostly for Catchpoint's sake, a very impressive study where we looked at the top 2,000 websites in the world and looked at their DNS performance. Stripping away all of the different things that would sort of put the thumb on the scale for an individual provider, we just looked at the sort of pure DNS performance, and that's where we came up with that 40% number, where managed DNS services as a whole perform about 33% better. NS1 performs about 40% better than self-hosted on average around the world.
Great. That was a great answer. Thank you so much. And guys, if you have any more questions, don't be shy, ask it in the chat, or if you come up with any questions and want to talk to Ben on a more personal level, remember we do have our office hours from 2:30 to 3 EDD today. So make sure you stop in, ask any questions. All of the speakers that we've had on our past sessions will be there. So it's going to be a very open forum discussion with everybody there. But in the meanwhile, if there are no more questions, please make sure that you take a moment to provide any feedback in the survey. And we have a 15-minute break coming up. So make sure you're getting your lunch, check your email, drinking some water, head outside, get some vitamin D, and make sure you don't miss our conversation at 12:20. But otherwise, thank you so much, Ben. I had a ball listening to you talk about this really amazing topic, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, Cash. Thanks, everybody.